This episode of Where Did the Road Go is brought to you in part by our Patreons. If you want to become a patron, go to wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Soraya.
Greetings and welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? Tonight my guest is Robert Allen Brewster, or R.A. Brewster, as his blog is entitled. So you can find that at rabrewster.com. And I heard him on Project Archivist, and I recommend checking out that show with him. It was pretty interesting as they talked about true crime and obscure cryptids, and it just kind of went all over the place, as it should on Project Archivist. And I realized I needed to have him on. And tonight we're going to talk about witchcraft, and we're going to talk about sort of the mixing of animal and human in some of the tales of witchcraft and some components of the occult. And it's a pretty interesting conversation. And then we ended up doing a fairly long Patreon extra segment as well. And he tells one of the creepiest personal stories I think I've ever heard. So I if you're not a patron, you might want to spend the $3 just to hear that story. It's very, very creepy. And that'll be up later in the week. As well, we talk about some obscure cryptids on that extra segment as well. Now, if you check out R.A. Brewster's site, which is rabrewster.com, he has a blog. He has what he calls creature features, which he talks about different cryptids and stuff. And he has Dustland Radio, and I listened to the first episode of that. It's sort of a fictional story podcast. And I listened to the first one, and it was a really good story. It was definitely unique and different, and I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the story. It's not like anything I had heard before as far as horror stories go and stuff. He also posts the No Sleep Reddit, and yeah, there's a bunch of stuff there. It's worth checking out. It labels him as a writer, apocalypse DJ, and developer. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. He's definitely going to be back. We spent another hour afterwards talking about miscellaneous stuff, and I think we're going to turn some of that into a show. I have an idea that should be kind of fun, very laid back, not as paranormal, more on paranormal media and stuff like that. So we'll see if that happens, but he definitely wants to come back, and we want him back. So you're going to see more of R.A. Brewster probably in the very near future. All right. So there's the introduction. Here's the show. All right, Robert, welcome to the show. This is your first time on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And I originally heard you talking on Project Archivist and was pretty blown away by that conversation.
Oh, those guys are great. Once you get anything rolling with them, who knows where it's going to go.
And on there, you were talking true crime and obscure cryptids. But tonight, we're going to talk about witchcraft.
Yeah, another passion project of mine. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Before we get started, though, why don't you tell people a little bit of how you got interested in this and where people can find your blog?
Okay. My blog is rabrewster.com. I've got a couple other things I'll run through there, like creature features. I focus on cryptids, and then you're going to find human monsters. I kind of been pulling a bit into Lonely Hearts Killers, that sort of thing. But what kind of got me interested in witchcraft was not too long back when I was in college. I actually spent a lot of time in the library, and the quietest place that I could ever get, because the library was always filled with people, was the third floor restricted section. I would kind of sneak back there because it was never actually locked. And it was just lined with books on the occult. And that's kind of how it all started. I picked up one day and became fascinated.
This sounds like the beginning of an H.P. Lovecraft story.
I wish I'd come across the Necronomicon. That would have been a heck of a book to find.
Oh, yeah, I went to the back room of the library, and there was this weird book.
And all of a sudden, tentacles started to sprout from my head.
So, were you not that interested in it prior to that?
I had heard a couple of things that had kind of like, I grew up in a very conservative background.
Okay.
And the thing that really kind of like, I guess, if you want to say was the progenitor of that whole idea once, or the whole fetish, if you will, um, was voodoo. There was a show that came into my town that was actually run through the church, and it was kind of a boot camp meets Christianity thing. And
Hmm.
it was a little weird, but they did a whole big thing on the evils of like witchcraft and Harry Potter and all that stuff.
Hmm.
And something they touched on was voodoo, which was to me fascinating. I had never heard anything about it at the time. And then later on, when I started going through the books, I started reading more about that and learning all who the big players were and the history that surrounds it. And it's really a fascinating topic.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. What struck you when you started going through the occult books? Where did your interests kind of focus then?
Went a little bit to Crawley,
Hmm.
uh, started reading on the Lima, and then started to look into, excuse me, I apologize, um, palmistry, which I guess is kind of the next step there, tarot card reading. And then I started to look more into the history behind kind of what became my current passion project now, which was the blending of the human and the inhuman. How witches, for like throughout history, have always been personified as a mixture of a woman or a man with something otherworldly, something animalistic, something bestial.
Hmm.
Like if you were part of this faith, you couldn't be a person. They kind of like dehumanized you, which actually I think led to a lot of what would be considered normal people performing these kind of atrocities, such as the witch trials. If you can look at somebody and think that they are lower than you, then you can do all kinds of horrible things to them.
Yeah.
And this kind of carried over too into Africa, which is where a lot of my like research kind of went, was that Africa has a huge fear of witchcraft. And they actually believe that most of the witches are completely unknowing of their abilities. They don't know that they have these powers. So when a drought comes or a famine hits or a disease wreaks havoc on the village, this person is probably unaware of what they've done, but they're singled out by the group and they're either killed or completely banished.
Hmm.
And it shows some sort of power that this kind of belief has over people. And that leads into a lot of all kinds of crazy stuff, especially when you start looking at, okay, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of this.
Uh-huh.
Chileo, which is Chile's second largest island.
Okay.
Okay. This is actually kind of one of the big things that struck me, and it really just made me go, how could this have worked, and how could people have not just fallen for this, but how could people's belief have been so strong that they were able to do this? In Chile, years ago, there was a group of people that controlled the entire island, basically like a mafia in a way, and they were a mafia of sorcerers. They had magical powers. They had the fear of curses. They would dress in these grand sort of headdresses and animal skins, and they would extort people for protection money in a way. Like, you don't give me this, I'm going to make sure that your third son dies, or your wife is barren, or all these different things. And they started to do all kinds of really just awful stuff until the government brought them all to a massive trial. And there it was revealed just how deep the rabbit hole went with them. Oh, no. One of the things that came out was a man was paid a large sum of money for about 20 years to bring an at first unknown source of meat to the opening of this cave. And the cave was sealed with a metal object, something they called like an alchemist's key at the time. And what it was essentially just like an oddly shaped iron key. But it would unlock this gate within the cave, and he would give this meat, which turned out to be human flesh, to a man who was gibbering, completely incapable of talking to a human being. and his whole body was misshapen, oddly proportioned, strangely arranged, if you will. And when the trial came to a head, excuse me, um, it came out as to what this boy or what this man was. He was what they called an imbuka, a magical guardian. He kept the magical secrets safe within the cave. What they did was they took a small child, around 6 months to a year old, and they brought him to someone called the mutilator or the deformer. It was a special title. And they would take this baby, essentially, and disjoint the arms and legs. They would begin to slowly alter the position of the head so that the head was always facing to the left. You know, kind of like how you get a crick in your neck.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine that forever.
Yeah.
And the worst part was that after you had kind of gotten the head in that stable position and the child had grown enough to keep it pretty much locked there, an incision was made on its right, deep on its right shoulder, and its right hand was shoved into it and sewn closed, so that it always had its hand behind its back, crooked into a V. And they let it live like that.
I think I've actually heard of this before, weirdly enough.
Yeah, it's a crazy story. Like, once you hear about it, it's like, that's some stuff right there.
And why did they do this?
He was considered a magical totem, kind of like how you would make a voodoo doll to attach to a person.
So it was ritualistic, basically.
Yes, it was a ritualistic thing. Putting him like this made it so that basically the wards or the protections within the cave wouldn't be broken. And they were as strong as he was alive. So when he died, you'd have to do it again.
How did they select the person?
Seemingly at random. From
really?
what I can gather, it was just whoever they could get a hold of.
Oh, I see. I see. So they just kidnapped someone.
Yeah, just kidnapping. Yeah. And then they did this for years. There are accounts of this going back, I think the earliest one I was able to find, give me just 1 second, I'm sorry, was going back as far as 1770s.
Wow. And it didn't stop till when?
I mean, the actual trial began 1880.
Man.
Yeah, so over 100 years.
Yeah, I've definitely heard of that. I don't remember why or where, but I have heard of that weirdness.
Yeah, that was the thing that really kind of grabbed me on just how powerful the belief in magic can be and what it can just allow a person to do.
Yeah. Okay. Well, from there, where did you go with this research?
From there, I kind of took it to, like, in a way, the next step. I kind of saw what they were doing to the baby as a type of transformation, and that's very big in magic, especially in especially in how we personify people. Like in Hispanic culture, there's a lechuza, which is a witch bird, if you will. It's a woman who has sold her soul to the devil, and she is allowed to take on a different form, sort of like a monstrous bird, a large owl with a human's face. And they can mimic the sound of a baby's cry. They can bring in thunderstorms and magic that can hypnotize those and that can bring them closer to them so they can eat their flesh and kill them, which prolongs their life.
Oh, sure, of course.
Yeah, you got to be young and beautiful. Yeah. Sure, you got to eat some faces every now and then, but it's cheaper than lipo. I mean, have you looked on the prices?
Fair enough. Or bathing in their blood. We can't forget that one.
Exactly. Well, Bathory, she did look great afterwards. Oh, Lord.
So, have you ever looked into how these beliefs have formed?
That's where things get murky. Like with going back to the Chileans, this whole sect that started that whole thing was actually, pardon me again, they actually did not begin that whole dark witchcraft until encountering a European who had brought over with him a book of magic. It was a book that he had. Now, this, of course, is kind of hearsay. It's extremely far back into their history, and a lot of it's oral, not a lot of it's written down. So take it with a grain of salt.
Right.
He claimed to have had a book that he had been compiling that contained the secret truths of the world. He had spoken to numerous different cultures. Some say he went as far as speaking to people that believed in the Hindu religion, Buddhism, uh, all these different things. Ended up in Chile. And they got a hold of the book, and what they read completely changed their belief on where their powers come from and what they can do.
Hmm.
It would essentially be like you, and this is a weird analogy, but if you gave a M16 to a caveman, like I thought I knew how the world worked, knock a lady over the head with a nice club, good to go. But now you're teaching me that I can knock out a whole lot of things a lot quicker.
But what would make them give up their beliefs, though, for something like that is what I wonder.
Well, personal gain. Like I said, a lot of them went for money, respect, power. A lot of people say that power corrupts.
Sure.
And if you take that into the context that if everyone believes that I have the ability to put a horrible curse upon them, and I can start using that for my own ability to get things, like I can get money from them, I can get women from them, I can get more status, you stop looking at them as if you're helping them, like a shaman would or an elder. You start to look at it as, what can I get out of it? In voodoo, you would call that a bakor, someone who does magic for the sake of himself.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Huh. It just seems like they would have had beliefs in place already. Maybe they weren't enough, I guess.
That's true. And what you could also imagine is a lot of them wouldn't have broken away. It would probably have been the ones that were weak-willed, I guess. Ones that were already kind of...
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
Because there were still the elders and they were still elders and shamans at the time that followed the old traditions as well. They just lost prominence.
Okay. Let's get into the whole witches turning half animal thing. Where do you find the earliest accounts of that?
Oh, the Lechuza. This one goes kind of back to as far back as I can remember. I get a date for. It's like Aztec times.
Okay.
Yeah. And what a lot of them will do is it's sort of an omen in a way. At the beginning, it wasn't this girl sells her soul to the devil. In the beginning, it was this person is blessed by the gods to show us when something horrible is coming. And usually they would do that in the form of storms. Now, in Native American religion, you have the Deer Woman, who is, I believe she's believed by the Lakotas and the Crees primarily. She's considered a nature spirit, a woman who is both beautifully attractive and also animalistic and sometimes violent. And to them, she was fertility. She was a sign of our own deeper connection to the animal kingdom. And this kind of ties into an overarching belief through a lot of different religions that kind of, fascinatingly enough, it spans numerous places. There are accounts of the Lamia in ancient Greece. Some say she was cursed by Hera to be half man or half woman, half child devouring serpent. And
right, yeah.
You've got the Wendigo and the Deer Woman, both animalistic, both primal, and those span cultures that would never have interacted with each other. Like the Lechuza, they would never have had any connection. That's a Hispanic myth to an ancient Greek myth. And it just kind of ties into this sort of, what was the word I'm searching for? Kind of a Zeitgeist, if you will, when it comes to magical belief, is that there is always a blending of something that is deeply wrong in these things that deal with the other world.
Now, could part of that also be from altered states of consciousness?
Every chance. Every chance, yeah.
Because, I mean, you see that what are they called? The theorem, I can never pronounce it correctly. but the half animal, half person forms that people see in altered states.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. The word
Yeah,
eludes me. Gosh.
yes, it's a very long word that starts with a th.
Dionysia? I can't do it. Nope.
And someone listening is going, duh, it's,
It's that weird Greek that no one can say.
But I mean, do you think that may have a part in it, where they have seen these creatures in altered states, these beings in altered states, so they've kind of tried to create them themselves in a sense?
I can see that as being a possibility. You can take altered states have been a huge part of how we've grown up as a species.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, that could easily be a connection.
Hmm.
It wouldn't take much to think that a man on peyote might see the pretty girl next to him suddenly turn into a harpy.
Yeah.
And from there, who knows where that could have sparked.
And then they start, well, I've seen this. This woman is a witch. She turned into a half whatever.
Exactly. And it just takes one person to say it before the fire takes off.
Now, you had when you looked into some of this witchcraft stuff, you were saying that this is part of why you think they were able to do some of the horrible things they did to these mostly women.
Yes, mostly women. A lot of the actual myths of transformation are also women for some reason. I've tried to wrap my head around why it seems to go more on the feminine than masculine. And that kind of ties into something which is a smidge misogynistic in a lot of cultures, is that women have always been viewed as lesser anyway.
Yeah, well, that's true.
Yeah. So it wouldn't be hard or a stretch to think that the weaker of the sex would be easily swayed.
But I would think too, maybe it has something to do. I mean, at one point, women were the more spiritual figures.
Oh yeah, that's another weird paradox. Is a lot of these women that were viewed as lesser or weak were actually well educated and were able to, like, for example, Salem. If you were a witch, if you knew how to heal someone.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, true.
So I mean, you were other in the sense that you knew things that people didn't know, and that made people scared. So from there, of course, you must eventually kiss the devil on, like, some mark on his body to gain his power, all these different things, and people kind of extrapolated that out.
Mm-hmm.
Easily something I could see happening.
But you did have a lot of matriarchal sort of cultures prior to a certain point in history as well.
That's true, and you don't see much stigma for witchcraft in those.
No. But they were more nature religion,
True, and you see also, like, with Egyptian, for example. Excuse me, there were powerful women in ancient Egypt.
Yeah.
And witchcraft was, in its own way, revered as being closer to the divine. There were so many different gods and so many different ways of invocation that the idea of magic was not alien. It was actually pretty commonplace, which is a fascinating idea within itself, because you can see a different kind of culture kind of embracing the idea that there are people that know these things that can change our lives.
Yeah.
And better us. And then you can look at that in a totally different way later on, where you see someone that is different, that is maybe even disformed or disfigured in some way. And you can look at them and think, this could ruin us. This could be the source of all of our problems.
Yeah. Or this person is touched by the gods in some way too.
Right. And it's a weird parallel, which is another fascinating thing. When you start looking at, especially in, like, voodoo, and this is one of the cool comparisons I've always kind of brought up to a lot of people that argue with me about how voodoo is always of the devil. Voodoo is a lot about possession, bringing in the spirits or the Gede to heal your body, or to fix you of what is ailing you, either in your physical form or in your mental form or your spiritual form. And possession in Christianity is a terrible thing. This is allowing some evil entity to enter you. But, excuse me, there is also the concept of taking in the Holy Ghost,
Right.
another type of spiritual possession. And so that kind of it sort of bridges a weird gap when a lot of these things come up, because when you start to look at some pagan ritual and start to look at something, say, in the Catholic Church, there are a lot of similarities.
Oh, absolutely. Well, so much of that stuff was taken from pagan beliefs.
Well, Christmas by itself basically is just a rebranded pagan ceremony.
Well, every holiday on the calendar, every religious holiday is basically that. The only one they didn't really get was Halloween.
Yeah, they went a different one with that one. Yeah, that was mostly corporate.
well, no, I think if I understand right, because it was Samhain, and they tried to rebrand it as All Saints Day, but people were so terrified of not appeasing their ancestor spirits that they could not wipe out the idea of Samhain.
Yes, that's and that ties into one of our cultural things is even today with Day of the Dead, ancestor worship is alive and well.
Mm-hmm.
And excuse me, that was one of those weird sort of, you would think it would go well with Christianity since we revere the saints as it is.
Right.
But it just, yeah, you're right. It did not work well.
Everything else, Easter, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you find pagan. I mean, you have an egg, a rabbit laying eggs, and it's like
giving them to you as offerings too. That's the best one.
Yeah. So it's like, there's nothing pagan about any of that.
No, we set up the milk and cookies for the magical man because of some sort of Christ allegory.
And the Christmas tree has nothing to do with the perseverance of nature throughout the winter.
No, not at all.
So I mean, when you look
at it, there wasn't Christmas trees in the manger. Come on.
In the manger that, if it existed, was in July.
And also, it didn't snow.
Yeah, there's that.
In the Middle East. I'll never forget. I'm sorry. This is a bit of a tangent.
Okay.
But I told you I grew up in a very conservative family.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll never forget one night. I was probably, Lordy, I was a tiny lad. Let's just say I was about 10. And we had sat through a very long Christmas sermon. And afterwards, the kids were allowed to go, and we kind of had like a little after church movie thing, and it was around Christmas time, and we watched like an Away in the Manger sort of animated film, and one of the scenes in there had the angel coming down in the snow in the middle of the desert to announce the birth of Christ, and I always thought it was fascinating that it snowed in the middle of the desert. And I mentioned this to my parents, and I just could not rectify it with myself. It became a big bone of contention at 10 years old.
And the thing is, it's not a matter of faith when you look at these things. This is more historical power plays by the church. It has nothing to do with whether or not Christ was a divine figure or whatever.
Oh no, not at all. Yeah.
It's all the church saying, well, how do we take control of things? Because they went into those pagan lands as friends, and then slowly twisted them around and got rid of the pagan beliefs and all that, and turned everything into theirs.
And you can kind of look at it too. Like let's just say Constantine. I believe it was Emperor Constantine that had the biggest. And correct me if I'm wrong on that one. He had one of the biggest impacts when it comes to merging the pagan tribes, if you will, under the blanket of Christianity.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah. Because if I'm not mistaken, he picked specifically the birth of Christ to be in alignment with one of the biggest holidays of the pagan religion was winter solstice.
Yeah.
To allow them to continue their own sort of worship while also bringing them kind of in line with his religion. And that's kind of, I believe, where it all sparked.
And that was just generally their game plan all along, was to kind of take those holidays, those ideas, and be like, oh, hey, well, we can celebrate this too, on the same date. And then after they got a little more entrenched, they went, now you can't celebrate yours anymore.
And then after a while, you start to forget what yours even was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they've been so integrated that people just don't think about
Yeah, and if you talk too loud, well, there's always the Inquisition.
it. So let's talk a little bit about that. You've looked into that. Actually, let's go back to the half woman, half
Yes.
creature thing.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, no. Well, the half woman, half creature is, to me, one of the most interesting facets of witchcraft throughout the ages. And it's so entrenched in a lot of mythologies. You even see it with, like, the centaurs, for example, in ancient Greece. Or you see it with the Lamia, which is a sad tale of a woman who had the misfortune of being loved by Zeus and took the awful punishment that came from that was being cursed by his wife Hera. And a lot of these that you start to see is magic as transformation. And Hera transforms her into a child devouring monster filled with a bloodlust that only a baby can satiate. And so she kills her own children and is forever left with that guilt and that awful horror at what she had done. And then you have the sort of, I don't want to say the inverse, but a connection there to the Wendigo, which is a transformation because of the awful sin of cannibalism. Wendigos are humans, regular people that, for one reason or the other, was forced to eat the flesh of another and was forever damned because of that, transformed into a constantly hungry, hellish sort of spirit. And then you have even, excuse me, the skinwalkers, which were shamans, medicine men, highly regarded individuals within Native American tribes that committed a horrible act to gain these otherworldly powers. A shaman, excuse me, a skinwalker can only be created when he kills a family member, essentially swapping their flesh for his. And that allows him to take on the sort of a lich like ability. And once you start to look into that, you start to see all these weird parallels that reach all the way across different cultures. And I thought that was fascinating, which made me question if there wasn't some underlying truth to it all, some fundamental idea that
that this is a real sort of thing.
yes, or in some way that there's some root there to this sort of one person becoming mixed with something else.
And when you have the skinwalker thing, I mean that's a popular subject all on its own.
It's fascinating.
And you definitely have people from all over who believe there are genuine skinwalkers out there.
Oh yeah. Well, there's
whether or not there are, I don't know, but
there's these weird encounters that you see with people. And one of the ones that I read, believe it or not, actually came from, excuse me, not too far from where I was originally born, which is in Virginia. I remember hearing a story about a man meeting someone who could not possibly be alive, yet was. And this person supposedly was his uncle. And his uncle was very dead, had been murdered, in fact. He had been to the funeral, and he swore that he had seen his uncle in some sort of, what was it, like some sort of dive bar in the middle of this long stretch of highway going from like Virginia down into Norfolk. And the story that I had heard was that he had spoken to the man, and no sooner had they left, because eventually, the supposed uncle had convinced him that you got me mistaken with someone else. I'm not the person you're thinking I am. No sooner had that man left than my uncle, or then the friend came back and watched as this person became someone else, basically, almost as if they changed their own skin. And one of the things about skinwalkers is they have the ability to wear the skins of other people.
Right.
And
right.
that was one of his beliefs, was that he had actually encountered this otherworldly entity and it had worn the skin of his uncle, which, take it as a grain of salt. This was a secondhand story heard by me when I was much younger, but it is a fascinating idea that they do walk among us.
And there's yeah, there are so many stories like that. I remember listening to an interview with JC, the late JC Johnson now, talking about some of his skinwalker stories and ideas, and it was a very fascinating type of stuff.
Oh yeah, it's once you start looking into Native American mythology on itself, there are some really crazy things in there. Like,
Go ahead.
no. Well, like one of the things with the skinwalkers that kind of got to me was I was reading the title eludes me now, but it was a concept on cursed items and objects, how to curse them, how to bind them, how to take them from one state into another. And they actually mentioned that the skinwalker supposedly had the ability to give you a gift, an item like a piece of jewelry or clothing, and it would slowly poison you with a sickness and eventually kill you. And anyone in your family born after that would struggle with this illness basically forever.
Huh, interesting.
Something I'd never heard of before.
That was making me think of something else, and I just forgot what it was.
I'm so sorry. I have a tendency to do that when I'll say something to somebody right when they're about to remember something, and then it's gone.
Oh, it's just that my brain's kind of random. I have to apologize for that.
No.
So, you said something that triggered, and I went, well, I was going to say it's kind of like alchemy in a sense.
Yeah, in a way. Now, that's a fascinating thing on its own. Not something I'm too versed in, but I've always thought the concept of it was the blending of magic and science. That's a cool thing anyway.
That and the blending of that, but just the transformation aspect as well. I mean, because that's what alchemy was all about, is transforming things.
Yeah, lead into gold, things into something else.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one of the things that alchemy even talked about, I believe, was the homunculus.
Yes.
Which even when it on its own is kind of within the spectrum of what I'm talking about, because it is a creature of magic, but it is also a human changed.
Yeah. And you also have and I think part of that comes from the concept of the golem in Jewish mysticism.
Oh, the golem. Isn't that the one where he put a scroll inside the statue's mouth?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
To magically bring it to life.
Which that would just be the coolest thing. Like, no, could you imagine just giving it an order like, I need you to go to the store to get eggs, and then popping it in its mouth, and it's just like, the eggs will be brought. And no one will stand in its way, for it is a 12-foot tall stone man.
Seems like a waste of a golem, though.
Yeah, especially if you only do it once. I mean, he will only ever bring you eggs, but you will never be without him.
But I've always felt like there's some connection there in the concept between a homunculus and a golem sort of thing, like magically creating a living thing.
And that's always an interesting idea too, because when you look at it, that's kind of what we do with science today in the idea of cloning.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah. And so the concept never changed. It just went into a different avenue.
A more scientific avenue.
More scientific avenue. You can almost say that modern science is just the evolved version of alchemy.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
So those alchemy precursors would definitely carry over. And I always thought it was cool is that we've even, and this was a document I read not too long ago. It was about, I'd say 2 or 3 years back. Someone had released a paper online. And now it's online. So again, grain of salt, you never know what's really out there. But it's right. Be a pretty scientific document. It had a lot of Latin. So I was like, well, this looks a little legitimate. It was got to go with the Latin. It's either a lawyer or a doctor. I can only believe one of the two. The document went on to talk about this scientist out of, I think it was Prague, or some of those weird sort of once upon a time Russian places. Mm-hmm. And he had successfully brought to term, that's 9 months, a human fetus that had been spliced with the genes of a pig. And now, if you know a lot about organ transplants or early medical procedures, pig architect, like anatomy, is very, very similar to that of a human.
Right.
And so much so that we were actually able to use parts of them to keep us going.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they claimed that he was successfully able to grow this creature, for a better term, to the point where it would have been considered alive before he was forced to terminate it. And the idea of that, it doesn't seem far-fetched.
No, not with a pig. Definitely not.
A pig, no. And it kind of ties into that Russian scientist. He was given a grant by Joseph Stalin. And at the time, Joseph Stalin was just giving out grants like crazy to anybody that applied for them because he wanted some way to step up his military procedures any way he could, scientifically or mechanically. And this guy claimed that he could produce a human-chimpanzee hybrid because chromosomally, we should be able to do it. Theoretically, we are only 2 chromosomes apart. And that's really that's the closest thing you're going to get to a crossbreedable situation.
Yeah.
So what he had done was he actually went down to Africa and picked up, I believe it was four female chimps, and none of them were able to successfully be impregnated with male sperm. He brought one male chimpanzee with the idea of inseminating human females back in Russia. Now, fortunately, that poor monkey died and was unable to go through the probably terrible procedures that would have occurred. But the idea that someone spent oodles of money to try and crossbreed a human with a chimpanzee leads me.
And why?
And why? That's another thing. Because what would you have gotten? Would you have gotten Planet of the Apes, or would you have gotten a completely insane creature with the strength of a chimpanzee?
Yeah.
And that sounds terrifying.
I mean, were they looking for special ops, sort of soldiers?
He promised Stalin he could produce an army of monkey men hybrids. That is not a joke.
Okay.
Yeah. That was his promise. And I guess Stalin was just like, give it a
shot, see what happens.
I'm going to fight the Americans. I'll take anything I can get at this point.
It sounds like a lot of what like Nazi Germany's attitude toward a lot of these occult objects, where it's like, it may sound ridiculous, but let's go look just in case.
Let's fly down to Antarctica to find that open hole that's in there.
Yeah. If we don't find it, no big deal, but if we do.
Could you imagine being the poor German soldiers in that U-boat? That must have been like, I did not sign up for this. I did not sign up for the Arctic seas.
You were talking also when we mentioned Native Americans, you had mentioned the deer woman. Is that it?
Yes. She's a fascinating creature. The deer woman was considered usually a good omen. If you saw her, she would sometimes be in the form of like a centaur, essentially. She would have the upper half of a beautiful woman and the lower half of a deer. And she would often show up to women who had lost children as sort of a fertility spirit, if you will, chance that you're going to have a child again. But then you have the inverse of that. You have her as a very predatory, very deadly spirit that would use her attractiveness to lure men away from not just their families, but from their tribe into the woods, where she would stomp them to death. And consume their flesh. That's a big thing too, going through the cultures. A lot of flesh consuming.
Yeah.
Cannibalism, it's just hardwired in the DNA, apparently. We just can't stop thinking about
it. That's weird when you think about it, especially because it does such bad things to us.
Oh yeah, it messes with your brain. Like, if you consume a certain part of the human body, and I forget which part it is, you're just basically setting yourself up some serious neurological damage.
Yeah, because there was some tribe in the what was it, South Pacific or something, that had
the shapes.
That had all. Yeah, the weird brain things, because they were consuming human flesh.
Chirons, that's what they're called.
Yeah, which is the mad cow disease thing too.
Yeah, because we're feeding cows to cows, which, I mean, how horrible must it be to be a cow? Not only are you bred to be eaten, but you are also fed your own brethren.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, this is horrifying. If you don't go vegan after that, it's not I'm not telling you to go vegan. That was a joke.
But you figure that happens too with like even pet food. You have when they oh, what is it? They'll take euthanized animals and mix them in with the pet food.
Ooh, I hope that is not true.
I believe that is true.
Ooh.
Not a lot, but there is.
Well, there's always an acceptable amount of rat feces that's allowed to be
right.
food. So, I mean, I could believe that.
Oh,
man. Makes you not want to eat out.
Let me double check this on a little on Snopes because I've been told that many, many times. Drugs used to euthanize pets have been found in some pet foods, leading to rumors that the product may include rendered dead cats and dogs, but there's no definitive evidence.
Why would you feed a dog to another dog? I mean, it's a dog-eat-dog world, but you can't take that literally.
There is a very long article on Snopes about it. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but yeah.
We'll check that out. Thank you, actually. That's going to be some interesting reading that will make me really consider what I give my pet.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it might not be good for him, but he does love McDonald's hamburgers. Might be a safe bet.
Yeah, maybe those are made of people.
Would explain why they're so tasty. No,
yes, clearly we have a taste for each other.
Which it is actually very disconcerting when you look at how many cultures just cannot stop thinking about eating each other.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm like, my goodness. And then, of course, there was that weird case of Wendigo psychosis, which is the term used for someone who, for some unknown reason, even in a survival situation where there's plenty of food and plenty of water, they have an overwhelming urge to eat their companion.
Huh.
Even when there is ready food available, they will fight a murderous desire to consume their partner because they are going to starve.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. And unpleasant.
Yes, especially if you're the partner.
Yeah, fair enough.
Like, I think I'll be on guard all night tonight, bud. You just right there. The thing with the Lechuza, and kind of going back to her from the Mexican folklore, is that she was often depicted as a bird or an owl. And this ties in a lot with witchcraft as it is, because owls are very prominent throughout a lot of Wiccan and a lot of pagan beliefs. But weirdly enough, they are not always viewed in a positive light.
Right.
They're more of an ill omen. And this actually tracks back to a really weird connection that kind of had me scratching my head for a good bit. The owl eventually became connected with the devil. Not so much for the horns or for the oddly off-putting screeching, but for the eyes, because a lot of early Christian writing talked about how the owl was a sinister presence because of its ability to look into you. And I remember reading that a lot, look into you. And it got me to thinking a lot about how we perceive not just people becoming like animalistic, but how we view some animals with almost human-like characteristics.
Sure.
Yeah. Because, I mean, if you look at an owl, it does appear to have some form of almost higher intelligence. And it may be because of its giant eyes, but it does kind of put you a bit off. And people have the same thing for cats. They often believe that cats are half in, half out. And one of the odd things is that you almost never hear about an animal, even though we prescribe a lot of human characteristics to it, being mixed with a human. You don't get the animal taking on the aspects of a person and like walking among us or talking to us. You always get us becoming animalistic, but never an animal becoming more human. And I thought that was a weird disconnect to me. Like, why is that never a thing?
Because we're reverting to our animalistic natures.
But we can't evolve an animal to be like us. And I thought that was very odd.
What about things like werewolves? Have you found anything particularly interesting there?
That one Other than the original myths about, you bit by a werewolf, you turn into a werewolf. Someone came up to me one day, and this was at college. Again, right around the time I was looking at those occult books. And he told me he's been reading a lot of really weird stuff online. And I'm like, no, you don't say strange things online. Never would believe it. Well, he sends me this link, and it is a fascinating story. And again, I say a story because grain of salt. But this person really wanted to know how to become a werewolf. He wanted to believe that he could do it. There was this salve that you could make out of wolf fat and herbs that you could rub across your body to make you into a werewolf, or there was the belt of wolf hide that you could wear, again, as a magical item to transform. But someone replied to him with a very strange answer, and it really got me thinking. And it kind of stuck with me all these years. It was the idea that you could become a werewolf, not just in your mind at first, but then becoming that way in your mind would transform your body. And this person claimed that you would go to a place where you felt extremely scared. Go to a place like a haunted building or an abandoned part of the forest, someplace that really made you upset, someplace that terrified you. And you would act like a wolf. You would strip down naked. You would yell and scream and do all these awful things. And then you would do something sexual. What doesn't have to be?
Of course.
Yes, it has to be sexual, of course. And then you would do that every day. It would become part of your ritual in a way. And if you did this for long enough, you would have an overpowering urge to go back. He believed that these places that scared you were places of power. They were places where you were not meant to be, but you were picking up on it. You were picking up on these latent sort of energies, if you will. And if you keep going back there, it can change you. And he claimed that that is, if you really want that to happen, if you want to take that change into yourself, you can. You can sort of absorb that energy and then make it work. And something that he harped on many a time was the idea of doing something that scared you. You have to go to this place. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
It definitely heightens your senses.
Right. Could it even, in a way, because you're so fight or flight, adrenaline, could it alter your state? And you could maybe even start to see things that you wouldn't have seen before. And now that's an interesting concept, because the idea of facing your fear of being filled with that sort of terrified energy is one of the ways people believe you can open your third eye.
Right. That's true.
And that's a strange connection I started to think about. And I wondered just what this might do to a person's psyche. Because if you start looking into some, and this is going a little bit off topic, but it ties back in.
It's okay.
When you start looking at some of the serial killers that believe they are filled with another kind of creature, that they're actually got a demon inside them or something like that, you start to see a sort of weird sexual undertone mixed in with their own fears in a way. Example, Ed Gein. He would wear the skin of women that he killed or dug up the corpses of, but he would wear that in a way to become someone else. He wanted to become a woman like his mother. He wanted to bring in that strength. He wanted to bring in that fear that she put in him. And there were cases of Ed going through fields late at night. I remember reading a story about this from, it was one of the witness reports of someone who had actually lived near Ed for most of his life. He would actually tell the story that he had seen an old woman walking around his yard at night. And this woman would always come up to his window, and he would like smack at the window, and she would run off. And he kind of find out that wasn't a woman. It was Ed wearing his skin suit at night, wandering around in people's backyards. So I started to think, the act of transformation on a well, for lack of a better term, a psychic level. And maybe that ties into Ed almost sort of being similar to that guy wanting to become a werewolf.
Yeah. Well, I think too, we create some level of our reality. It's not just matter. I think our consciousness interacts with it. So if we do this stuff long enough, maybe it has some kind of genuine effect on who we are and what we put out into that reality.
I can believe that. I'm actually a firm believer in you're the master of your own reality.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of self-help gurus say the same thing.
And maybe the skinwalkers are people who have really kind of fine-tuned that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in order to become one, you have to kill someone you love.
Yeah.
So, I
Well,
mean,
yeah.
that right there does a lot to your psyche, I can imagine.
You got to be pretty intense, and obsessed to do something like that.
Oh yeah, you got to really want it.
Yeah, and to want it to that level is pretty frightening.
And that's where a lot of like great villain stories come from. Like this is comic book level crazy. Like Lex, I know you really wanted to kill Superman, but you've been giving yourself cancer with his rock for a while, but he's just like, it doesn't matter how much cancer I have, I want him gone. Like that's some tough guy. Like
But I feel like that's even more plausible than killing someone you love.
that's true. Yeah. Yeah, and that would take a certain kind of stones that not a lot of people have.
Luckily.
Yeah, fortunately for a lot of loved ones.
Yeah, because if a lot of people had the ability to just go kill someone they love, we'd be in even more trouble than we already are.
Oh yeah, I mean, and humanity itself has a lot of gray area. Let's just say
What?
that humanity itself has a lot of gray area. So
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I don't know. Let's not add any more to the mix. I don't want it to go too dark there.
I mean, and it would have to be something, what could be so important to someone? I mean, just love of power,
I would argue it wasn't even that. I think that they were driven by the biggest fear that we all have, especially as skinwalker, is the fear of death.
Mm.
Because let's just say you had the option. Let's just say you were given a Black Phillip moment. And what does thou want? And you had the chance that you could live almost forever. Like, I could give you this ability, this power. You could gain so much that you could live longer and fight off death. All you have to do is kill the person that you love or kill a loved one, and you'll never die.
Makes sense.
Yeah. I think that's what was one of their main motivations. Sure, the power was a big thing, of course, but if you could fight off that looming specter longer than everyone else, it could be a powerful motivator.
Okay. I guess that would do it.
Of course, that you would still have to be a terrible person. I mean,
oh yeah, no, certainly.
Like,
but you could justify it.
One, he was like, yeah, I mean, you got a little justification.
You were also talking about some of the tortures that witches were put through during the Inquisition.
Oh.
And you mentioned to me before we went on the witch's chair, and that one's always just ugh.
Yeah, that's the worst way to go, in my opinion. That of all the ways to kill someone, slow frying them is just wrong. Like,
you gotta wonder where they came up with this stuff.
There's a lot of sadists in the world.
Yeah. Sadists with power.
Yeah. There was one that, if you ever read the Malleus Maleficarum, there's actually a translation of it online.
I don't think I've ever read it. I know exactly what it is. The Hammer of the Witches.
Yeah. If you ever get a chance to, it's just a quick Google, and you may take a little bit to find it, but it's pretty interesting because there was a device there was a device tied into this procedure, but it was a procedure called pricking a witch. And they believed that there was a spot on a person's body that would not bleed. And that spot was where the devil had kissed them to give them their power. So they would stab women over and over and over again with small stiletto type knives to find a spot that didn't bleed. And one woman was stabbed over 1,000 times
Wow.
till she eventually died from blood loss because they wanted to find. And there was a device, which was at the time, ingenious, truly. It was a pricking device that had a retractable blade that was activatable. So you could poke this person for, let's say, 10 to 20 times, and then you poke them on that 21st time and you retract the blade so it doesn't pierce their skin. You found a spot that doesn't bleed. They're a witch. Yeah.
Oh, beautiful.
Yep. And it was used to great effect to kill a lot of innocent people.
Oh, the dunking. Yeah.
That was just the worst because you were never getting out of that. Like either you floated and they killed you, or you sank and they killed you.
Yeah.
Like you're just dead at that point.
And how these things get started and these people get that kind of power to do that type of stuff is it should serve as a warning to us, because I don't think we're immune today to that type of thing taking over under the right circumstance.
I know it would. You're right. It would take the right circumstance, but I think we would be just as monstrous today.
I mean, we get it a bit with racism. It's just not as fully organized.
And it's also not as, what's the term I'm looking to, fervored as it was.
Yeah, well, in some cases it is.
Yeah, well, you're right. In some cases it is. But like with the religious fear of witchcraft during the Inquisition, it was like you could so much as look at someone cross-eyed and you're getting killed.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure, and I'm, I'd like to think at least some of them thought they were doing good and weren't just sadists, but it's so hard to excuse any of the stuff that was done to these women. It's like, and I know their logic was, well, it doesn't matter if they die because if they're good, they're going to heaven.
Right.
And it's like, oh, well, okay then, except what if you're wrong? What if there is no heaven?
Yeah.
And why are you?
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I was saying, well, better yet, you still murdered an innocent person.
Yeah, yeah. And it's like, and it's one thing if they kill them and they're of the devil, because then it's not murder. But what if the person was innocent?
Exactly.
Now, didn't you just commit murder? Oh, well, it's okay because we're doing God's work. All right, great.
And that's the biggest catch-all of it all. It's like, it's just the Lord.
Yeah, yeah. Because it says in the Bible to,
not
come up with
to live.
Well, yeah, but come up with ingenious torture devices to use on anyone you feel like it.
There is some weird Old Testament stuff.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Just like there was and what's cool too is you can actually use that in a reverse. There's a lot of people that give Christians a bad name when they wear tattoos. They say that you've defamed the temple of God, which is your body.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they cite a particular verse in the Bible. And there is a guy, and he's been kind of popular lately. I think he won like one of the ink competitions, one of the national ones. It was on television. It was televised, and he ran a completely Christian tattoo parlor. And people always asked him, "How can you justify that?" And he was like, "Well, I'll ask you, if you're citing the same verse in the Bible about not marking your body, not being like the others, marking your body for the dead." Do you know that is for a particular type of Christian called a Lutheran? And I would ask if you are following the tenets of the Lutheran Church. Now, it may not be Lutheran. I do apologize. I may be getting that wrong. But that also would mean you wouldn't cut your beard. You wouldn't take a bath. You wouldn't shave your legs if you were a lady. You wouldn't trim your nails. So since you're not doing any of those things, it seems okay if I get a tattoo. Yeah.
Nice.
I liked his answer. He was a smarmy man.
So how often do you post in your blog?
I try to post at least one creature feature a week. That's kind of been set back from lately because unfortunately I suffered a terrible mass computer failure event.
Yes, I believe you had a picture of your hard drive on fire, even though it was water that destroyed it.
Yes, it was a bad picture, but it worked really well for the analogy. Yeah, it was. It's basically all of that is wiped. Now, fortunately for me, I have most of my backups saved, but I didn't have very many creature features backed up.
Now tell people what the creature features are.
The creature features are a sort of focus lens that I do, a bunch of an article in depth on various cryptids and creatures that may or may not exist, such as the West Virginia vegetable man and the Zanfretta alien abductions.
Now, the vegetable man. Let's talk about the vegetable man
He
for a
is
minute.
popular.
I heard it.
Anytime he shows up in a conversation, he's a popular man. He was originally sighted out of Fairmont by Jennings Frederick. And this guy claimed that he had been walking through the woods, as you do, definitely not illegally hunting. And he started to hear a very high-pitched sort of like chattering noise, kind of like when you hear a record player running at like a really fast speed.
Right.
Or a movie projector going off. And he heard that this sound coming from like kind of a hill over a rise. And as he moved towards it, this creature jumped out. And it was skinny as a reed, but much taller than him. And its body was skeletal, green. Its eyes were sick, yellowish, almost jaundiced, and they were huge. And from its hands grew these long fingers with suction cups at the end of them, and needles protruded from the suction cups. He looked at this thing, horrified, as you would be, and it spoke to him without moving its lips. And it told him that you do not need to fear me. I need to talk to you. I wish to communicate. I come as a friend. We know you. I wish medical assistance. I need your help. And as he looked into this creature's eyes, the eyes began to flash a yellow and red. And he felt hypnotized, almost paralyzed. And the creature descended upon him, piercing his arm with its suction cup-like fingers and draining some of his blood. And after that encounter, which to Jennings must have felt like an eternity, but actually lasted just a few minutes, the creature jumped away, ran up the hill, and he heard a oscillating sound, and the sound of a great boom, which he took to be the creature's ship taking off. Now Jennings supposedly did not talk about this for years until he finally broke down and talked to Gary Barker, or Gray Barker.
That's who I was trying to come up with.
Yeah. And that was the only encounter of the vegetable man to date. And is probably the oddest case out of West Virginia, which is weirdly enough home to quite a few cryptid encounters.
Yeah, West Virginia definitely has a weird history.
It does. I actually live not too far from the Flatwoods Witch sighting.
Flatwoods Witch?
Oh.
Witch or monster?
It's sometimes called the Green Monster.
Okay, I've only heard it referred to as the Flatwoods Monster.
Oh, I've always heard it as the Witch. I actually have a picture of the monument they built on the sighting of the creature.
And I feel like that's one that could fall into the government experiment sort of category.
Especially if you take the second sighting as part of the encounter. Because the second sighting, where it appeared to be a spacesuit and not an actual being, was terrifying. Allegedly, it removed the large Ace of Spades type head to reveal a reptilian style creature. And horrified the heck out of the guy who saw it. I was like,
I imagine.
Yeah. Because not only did you see this terrifying thing, the thing then took off its head to reveal another terrifying thing. It's just like, man, it's like you take the mask off, but instead of being Old Man Jenkins, it's just Satan. So it was the devil all along.
I don't know if I even fully remember that was the case.
The Flatwoods was the Flatwoods Monster, or the Flatwoods Witch, was a very weird one, because if memory serves me correctly, it also had elements of radiation poisoning mixed into it. 3 young boys, living around the Flatwoods area, heard a large boom and saw a light streak through the sky. and this light was very close to the ground and seemed to hit not far from where they were. So they go through the woods. They tell their mom first where they're going. The mom decides to come with them, and the dog tags along, and they join up on the trail with a sheriff from the town who had also saw the light and was curious as to what it could be. And as they started to get closer to where it must have touched down, you see the singeing of trees. They thought it was a meteor or a comet falling to Earth. And they started to smell the strange, almost metallic burning smell, like a car fire, if you will. And they started to notice screeches coming from this burned out clearing now, where the scorch marks all over the ground. Their dogs started to go just bananas at the smell of this. And as they rounded the corner, they saw a large thing with a cylinder-type body, long, spindly, almost grass-thin arms, and a head that's shaped like an ace of spades with two glowing eyes. They were horrified. The dog threw up, ran away. The boys all seemed to start to feel a type of nausea wash over them. The sheriff passed out. All four of them, because the three boys and their mom, was able to drag him away from the creature, and they got back to the house. The dog died a few days later. The boys started to show signs of radiation burns on their skin. They all tested positive for some form of radiation poisoning from being near the creature. And not long after that, there were strange, I don't want to use the term disappearances, but mass exodus of people.
Really?
Hmm?
Like, when you say disappearances, do you mean like no one knows what happened to them?
No,
or?
I mean like a large number of them just decided, I don't want to live in this town all of a sudden.
I think that's reasonable.
Yeah. Like, I'm out of here. Boom.
Now, what other types of stuff do you write about?
I do a lot of dark fantasy, something that I've been working on. I actually post on Reddit, No Sleep, pretty regularly.
Oh, okay, all right.
I'm also.
I just actually started checking out. I just actually started checking out the No Sleep podcast, where they take the stories from No Sleep.
It is phenomenal, and you will binge it. I'm a big fan of David Cummings. Can't recommend it enough.
But go on. What type of stuff do you write for them?
I do a lot like horror stories, kind of first person stuff. Recently, I put up. And I say recently, it's been a little bit since the update. Enter the Well House, which you can read on the website under stories. I'm also revamping a dark fiction fantasy series called Dead Letters, which is the premise of that is a scribe is tasked with taking down all of the urban legends, secondhand stories, legends and myths, trying to find the common root to them and tracking down the real story behind it. And his view is these are important. These are vital pieces of our shared history on this realm, and he calls them dead letters. Otherwise, they're forgotten.
I see.
Yeah. And a lot of them kind of deal with, in a way, change and how even though you desire to find some way out of the horrible situation that you might be in, the way out isn't always better, and it doesn't always lead you to someplace good. Because I've always been a sucker for a fantasy series or a fantasy story where it's not always a happy ending. And happy is a subjective term.
True.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you planning on writing any fictional books at any point, or sticking to short stories here and there?
Working on one right now, actually. It's more of a departure from Dead Letters or like the first-hand kind of accounts that I do on Reddit. It's a tale of a young man who is trying to save him and his sister from poverty. So he joins up with a mercenary group. And the mercenary groups task him with helping a village deal with what at first appears to be a bandit situation, and it turns into something much larger than that. The sister, however, is dealing with her own hidden secrets and reaches out to a deity who specializes in helping people give in to those urges. And it sort of culminates in a kind of happy situation.
Okay.
Honestly, I am a terrible person of summarizing things, especially things that I'm working on.
Fair enough. And once again, people can find your blog where?
At rabrewster.com.
All right. Well, I thank you for joining me tonight. This was interesting.
Oh, yeah.
And I hope to have you back.
Oh, anytime, yeah.
And a special thanks to our Patreons who are donating at the $10 or above level. Christopher Sheehan, Mark Brady, Allison Cook, Christopher Vaughn, Robert Groom, Chris Elmquist, Super Inframan, Patricia Giaquinta, John Eddy, Alfred Tuttle, Kevin Schreck, and Carla Mahoney. Thank you all so very much. All right, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Robert. And rabrewster.com, go check it out. As I said at the beginning, he has a podcast called Dustland Radio with some fictional stuff. He has some stories up on the blog, and he has his creature features. So a bunch of stuff to check out there. Upcoming on the show, next week, my guest should be Robert Guffey. We'll be talking about his book, Camelio, which is subtitled The Strange But True Story of Invisible Spies, Heroin Addiction, and Homeland Security. And I've had so many people ask me to have Robert on to talk about this. I believe Steph Young covered a little of some of what he talks about in here as well on one of the shows. Also, a lot of people have been asking about Steph Young. Hopefully she'll be back eventually. Our schedules simply don't match up at this point. Even having a phone conversation has proved to be near impossible, unfortunately, but we're working on it. She has put a few books out and a few other things. You can go to StephYoungAuthor.com if you want to see what she's up to. And like I said, hopefully she'll be back sooner or later. Also, let's see, what else do we have upcoming? I have a few shows actually done that I just need to get up for all of you. There's a Fringe News show where everything went wrong, and we still got it done. It's still a good show, but wow, it was there were issues. And we ended up with a drunken, screaming Sasquatch of a Josh by the end of it, which was pretty funny. I don't think that made it into the recording, though. We have a show I just did with Joshua and Ren that was really, really good, and that'll be up soon. And Joshua and I also did a movie review show a few weeks back. I have yet to publish. So that will be up. I'm going to try and get all of them up this week. We'll see how that goes. And I also like to point out Strange Familiars is its own podcast. So although I posted here on Where the Road Goes channels and stuff, go subscribe to him. You'll usually get them first. I kind of post them a little bit afterwards to help him get a little more exposure, because I think it's a really quality podcast. But you can so hop over to strangefamiliars.com where you can subscribe to everything and check out some of the cool merch he has as well. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.